Alex Barnes Ross, otherwise known as Apostate Alex, is with me today, and we're going to talk about the actions that he's been taking in the United Kingdom, speaking out against Scientology abuses, as well as taking on the actions that they do in the UK. He actually has been contacting and working together with local government agencies. We talk about the difference in the laws in the United Kingdom versus the laws in the United States of America. And we get into an interesting discussion about that. And then we talk also about the recent L. Ron Hubbard birthday event. And we both have comments and observations regarding that. I think you're going to enjoy this show. I hope that you find it informative. Here's Alex Barnes Ross, otherwise known as Apostate Alex. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and I've got a special guest today, all the way from the United Kingdom in England. We are going to bring on Alex Barnes Ross, otherwise known as Apostate Alex. And without further ado, here he is. Hello, Alex. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. We were just talking before we went on the air about the weather. It's going to be 83 here today, which is 28 Celsius. And you're in, where are you, in outside London or in London?
Yeah, I'm in the UK, and it's we're in the middle of a storm at the minute. We are going to get a bit of warmer weather this week coming, but yeah, not as good as where you are, obviously.
This is typical spring weather, I take it, for the UK, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Anyway, we're having Alex on because we wanted to talk about, recent events and things that he's done and has been doing and up to. And I titled this, here's a picture of Alex right here, right in front of St. Hill Manor, right? But then I decided I wanted to title this video, Scientology's Biggest Pain in the Neck, Apostate Alex, because Alex, you're on their radar and you are their biggest pain in the neck for sure. And the reason is because you're being effective. I mean, that's how it works, in terms of Scientology. When you're being effective, you become the target, right?
Yeah, they don't like anybody being critical or anybody questioning them or exposing their lies and their manipulation. Anybody who does anything like that is on their radar. And if you start doing what I'm doing, speaking to members of parliament and, campaigning for legislative change, and most importantly, speaking the truth publicly with the media and here on YouTube, they really don't like that. And they'll come after you under their practice known as fair game.
No, exactly. And it's not like, just speaking out on the internet or speaking out to reporters and stuff, that's one thing. But you're actually doing more actions than that. I mean, you're actually physically protesting in front of St. Hill during the International Association of Scientologists, event. You're, like you said, you're appearing before government agencies. You're being on documentaries and things like that. And so that gives you a high profile, and therefore you're somebody that they try and take down. Right?
Yeah, I think, when you think about how to make change, I think, this is a bigger concept than just Scientology, but there's two elements. There's protest and there's advocacy, right? And you don't make change without both of those things, right? Standing outside somewhere and protesting is great, and that is helpful in raising awareness and stopping people from joining, and all of those sorts of things. But you don't actually get any government change in terms of policy or, greater scrutiny from law enforcement. All of those things don't happen without advocacy too. So it's important to do both. And what I've tried to do over the last 3 years is kind of find my feet as an ex-Scientologist and figure out what I can contribute to this. And the beginning of this year is kind of when I made the decision to really be quite more focused in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. I feel like I found my feet now. I know what I'm doing, where I'm at. And obviously, there's a lot to learn in terms of how to make that change happen. But I'm really focusing on both aspects. So giving survivors a platform to share their stories about what happened to them inside the Church of Scientology, but also taking those stories and using them to educate policymakers and lawmakers and, frontline support staff. Because in the UK, for example, at the moment, spiritual and ritual abuse, which Scientology would fall under, isn't recognized in the statutory safeguarding guidelines, for example, the framework. So, if you approach a healthcare worker and you say, I'm being abused by my religious minister, there isn't somewhere that healthcare worker can go and look as to how do I deal with that? Like, what support can I offer? What does that person need? So it's little things like that in the back end that adding this particular form of abuse to the framework is not going to take down Scientology, but it is going to provide more resources and greater awareness to support people who are leaving. So I'm really focused on protest and advocacy, and also on the focus that it's not the so-called religious beliefs that I'm against, it's the abusive practices and behaviors, right? Everything that I'm doing is geared around, cool, you can believe in Scientology, doesn't make a difference to me. If you want to be a Scientologist, be my guest, with or without the church. But the question I have is it okay for the church or anybody to force you to disconnect from a family member, or force you to have an abortion, or require you to do interrogations on the e-meter and harsh ethics conditions and punishments? Is it right for a child to be brought up in Scientology before they have a complete awareness of what Scientology is, and being old enough to actually consent to that? Those are the sorts of questions I'm raising about the organization's behaviors and practices, that hopefully will open the door for legislators and so on to look at whether the religious belief system itself is harmful, which I know a lot of people ask and talk about. But here in the UK particularly, it's a big thing to confront. If you go to a member of parliament and say, hey, I think Scientology is harmful, then they go, whoa, hold on, that's a big kettle of fish to open. I don't want to open that can of worms. I'm not interested. Whereas if you say, look, irrespective of what they believe and what the text says, what they are doing is human trafficking, modern slavery, and forced familial disconnection. Those things are all already crimes. So then the question becomes, well, how on earth are they getting away with doing that in 2026? And then you open the door to start having those conversations about, well, this is how they get away with it. This is how they skirt around religious protection, the legal system, and so on. And then hopefully then pave the way to, allow survivors to seek justice in a way that they currently can't.
Yeah, we're the same point of view here with Janis and myself, in that we're not criticizing Scientology's religious beliefs, because people can believe what they want. If they want to worship a rock, they can do it in the United States. It's freedom of religion, right? But we are the same way. We want to tell the history and also point out the abuses and let people tell their stories. Now, I wanted to ask you, because in the United States, Scientology has really hidden behind the fact that they have tax exempt status from the IRS here in the United States, which therefore, quote unquote, they're a church, right? In other words, that's the only impetus that the courts use in order to affirm that, yeah, Scientology is a religion, so we have to treat them and respect their religious beliefs whenever anybody brings a lawsuit or does something in the legal arena. Do they have similar status in the UK?
No, and you also have to remember that our judicial system and our, governmental system is very different to yours in the US.
Yeah, your barristers wear wigs and the judges wear wigs, right?
Yeah, of course, and that steeps in
I'm just joking.
Centuries of history. But when you think about the religious aspect, the king of our country is also the head of the Church of England, right? Mm-hmm. There are in the House of Lords, you have crossbench peers, and you have people on the left and the right, and people who sit in the middle, and you have religious peers, right? High up bishops of the Church of England sit in the House of Lords and have a say on the policies that get sent for signing by the king. So religion is a little bit more intertwined in our country, but not in a kind of way that I believe the church holds authority over the day-to-day living of humans in the UK. There are many people here who have lots of different religions. Scientology don't have any sort of say in laws or anything. They're not part of the Church of England. It's a separate thing, so there's no risk on that front. But I think it's important context, because the UK is a bit more intertwined in religion in terms of our actual setup. So there isn't that really clearly identifiable separation of church and state like you have in the US. And that's really important when it comes to Scientology stuff, because Scientology doesn't have charity status in the UK. When they applied for that in 1999, they were rejected. The Charity Commission ruled that Scientology does not benefit the public. And despite Scientology's best efforts, they failed to secure that. So they're not considered a religious charity. However, they did take the government to court. And in 2013, while I was on staff at London Org, the chapel in the London Org building, which is just one room inside the Ideal Org, was recognized as a place of worship for the purposes of marriage and wedding ceremonies. And as a part of that Supreme Court ruling, the definition of religion in British law was changed so that it encompasses faiths that don't believe in a single deity. So Buddhism, for example, is now considered a religion under British law where perhaps it previously wasn't. And that is a result of the Scientology chapel ruling in 2013. So in some respects, their buildings are designated places of worship. There was also a tax lawsuit that lasted about 10 years afterwards. As soon as they got that place of worship for the purposes of weddings and funerals, they then went to court and said, hey, well, now we're a place of worship. We shouldn't pay tax on those buildings. So they managed to escape paying. It's kind of like a property tax. It's called business rates here in the UK, where if you have a business that's operating in a property, you pay an annual percentage based on the value of the property to the local council. And they managed to escape paying that because those places of worship were designated in 2023 places of public worship. The difference being, can people go into a Church of Scientology and engage in some form of act of worship in a public setting? And of course, the crux of it was not auditing, because the government, the Charity Commission and HMRC see auditing as a private personal practice, not something that can be done in public or benefits society. It's something that allegedly only helps you individually. So it's not a public worship. And yes, the British law was changed so that you don't have to worship a single deity in order for it to count as worship. So it all fell upon the idea of Sunday service, which I think is just absolutely insane, because Sunday service is not a part of Scientology religious scripture as written by L. Ron Hubbard. Mike Rinder, admitted to the fact that he basically created this Sunday service thing so that they had a religious worship ceremony they could do on Sundays to make them appear more like a church.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing by getting this. They used to have the staff or auditors wear the minister collars. You know what I mean? And it's just sort of a presentation to the world that yes, we are a religion, but they don't normally wear those,
Yeah. Precisely. And if you look at the court case, the ruling, it's actually really interesting because they did lots of unannounced visits to the London Church of Scientology because they wanted to see, we don't want to just take their word for it. Are they actually doing these things? And in the report, the judge says on the several occasions, unannounced and announced, that I went to the church to check if they're doing this. They did have a sign outside saying Sunday service. They did have a post on social media saying all are welcome. We went into the chapel and they did hold a service. Nobody went to the service, but they were in fact engaging in holding an act of public worship. And so for that reason, they were exempt from paying business rates. But
I would think their service, I would think their Sunday service would be playing an LRH tape, like an LRH lecture or something.
If I remember correctly, because there was a big drive to get all staff members to go to Sunday service. If I remember correctly, there's an element of public, of group processing. There's some reading of LRH scripture, and perhaps some news. It's a bit like graduation, but add some group therapy and some LRH quotes and you've got it. Nobody really goes to these things. They do officially hold them, but it's very clear they only do that because it means they pay less tax. So a very long-winded way of answering a question, is Scientology a religion in the UK? Kind of and kind of not. Its buildings are designated places of public worship. However, it's not considered a religion for charity tax purposes. And let's not also forget, in 1984, a High Court judge here in the UK ruled Scientology as dangerous, harmful, and sinister. And in 1971, the UK inquiry, the Foster Report, came to the conclusion that Scientology is socially harmful. So it's a big question mark. It's not clear, black and white, yes or no.
Well, I was going to point out, back in the 60s, Scientology was basically not banned, but it was like, Janis, they've told stories about how, they couldn't get into the country. They had students from the United States wanting to come to St. Hill to the briefing course, and they had to go in other routes because they'd been banned. And then Hubbard left St. Hill in England to go down to South Africa because the UK was going like, you can't stay here, So it's not like the UK hasn't, taken them on before. And it's same thing in Australia. I mean, they've had a ban in Australia before as well. So, it seems like the laws are definitely different in those places than they are here in the United States. And then I don't know if anybody's had lawsuits like they have here in the US against Scientology that have gone before judges. Like here, the judges now are saying, oh, you've got to go through religious arbitration because you signed this thing. But I don't know if has that happened in the UK that you've heard of or anything like that?
There have definitely been lawsuits. Bonnie Woods is a prime example who won a harassment case against Scientology. So they're in a bit of hot water from that, but that was in the early 2000s. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a lawsuit since they introduced the arbitration clause. And it will be very interesting indeed to see how they approach what I've been doing when we inevitably end up in some sort of legal battle, which I'm sure will happen at some point. Kind of already has to some extent, which we'll talk about later. But they haven't tried to use that excuse of religious arbitration here in the UK yet. But that doesn't mean they won't try. However, right. I believe that it's not going to work here because in the UK, the courts generally tend to exercise a bit of common sense. And the thing with the religious arbitration is it's inherently unfair. It is not actually based on religious doctrine. It is based on Scientology's policy of legal warfare and using the legal system to bankrupt, to harass, and to intimidate people into compliance and giving up with their suit. So it's a form of legal warfare. It's not a form of genuinely trying to resolve the dispute. So, I hope that the UK courts will see that and use a bit of common sense, but we'll see.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the United States, in my opinion, that religious arbitration thing, that's an easy out for the judge so he doesn't have to make a decision, because they don't want to deal with these Scientology lawsuits because they go on for years and years and years, and they have a full docket of all this other stuff, and they go, oh, here's someplace I can send this and I don't have to deal with it because, quote unquote, the IRS said they're a religion, so we're going to follow it because we can't intrude on that. And once one judge did that here in America, oh, it's precedent. Other judges do the same thing. And it's just a lazy way of dealing with it rather than, like you said, from a common sense point of view.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to give you this quote here. This is from OSA Network Order number 106 called Legal Strategy. This is a genuine quote from Scientology policy. This is what the why of all this is that lawyers delay and prolong in order to make money. Therefore, it can be made too expensive for them to continue a case against us. They will drop it. Not only that, they won't start one in the first place. The strategy could be called punitive defense. The word would get around mighty quick. Don't tangle with or sue Scientology. It just buys so much trouble and expense, we can't face it. There is a strategy in war which we can apply to legal. It is a very clever strategy and time-tested, but never picked up and used generally. It consists of exhausting the resources of the enemy or potential enemy without even engaging in a direct confrontation. The end product is that he goes into despair and succumb. attackers of Scientology are basically cowards and they are basically liars. The first factor is handled by a good legal attack on them personally and individually. Legal is a type of warfare, a warfare of better reasons, LRH. So that is the quote, the policy that Scientology uses when it comes to the legal system. And the arbitration is a prime example of that. They're not doing it because they want to resolve the issue informally, which is what arbitration is meant to be. They're using it because they know that it will harass, intimidate, and scare whoever's suing them into submission.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that it's been effective over the years. I mean, Larry Wallersheim eventually got a judgment against Scientology, and they paid out like $10 million. Originally it was 30, and he got like 10 million, but it took him like almost 30 years to get it. So then if you add in all the lawyer time and all that sort of thing and all that, it almost makes it like, why did I go through 30 years in order to get basically not very much? That's Scientology's viewpoint on it from L. Ron Hubbard, like you said. And it has been effective, unfortunately.
Yeah, precisely. And the point that I'm trying to make is, if you have been harmed or abused by this organization, you should be able to seek justice, compensation, right. And I think people should be aware that this is something that happens. And so essentially, Scientology, what they do when somebody puts their hand up and says, hey, I was abused in this organization, they don't even have to say the organization is responsible for doing it. They just have to say, I was harmed while I was a part of Scientology, and Scientology will come after them with the multi-billion-dollar slush fund they've got to attack critics. And I don't think that's fair, because I don't think that is justice, right? If justice can only be sought by people who have lots of money, then it's not fair. It's not equal. So what I'm trying to do is raise awareness and say, hey, look, the system needs changing, because as it currently stands, people who have stories to tell and who have been abused and don't have the infinite resources that the Church of Scientology have don't stand a chance in hell of actually getting any sort of justice or, exposure about what happened to them. So what I'm trying to do is instigate that change that will make it easier for survivors to share what happened to them, seek justice, but most importantly, to prevent it from happening again to other people.
Right. Now, along those veins, I mean, you spoke out to where was this? East Grinstead?
This was the Mid Sussex District Council. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And why don't you tell our viewers here who may not be familiar with what you were doing there and what the results were?
Sure. So every year, Scientology have an annual event called the IES event, the International Association of Scientologists. The IES is Scientology's official membership body. And the big event, they have lots of events in their calendar every year, whether it's the New Year's event or L. Ron Hubbard Birthday Event. And the IES event takes place in East Grinstead, their UK headquarters. And we've protested outside the event for the last 3 years. And essentially, they tried to ban protesting last year. I don't know if you remember. I think we did a video about it. They tried to implement what's called a public spaces protection order, and tried to say that protesting causes alarm and distress and should be banned because it's anti-religious and so on. So that was a big kind of legal-ish, expensive year of my life spent defending our fundamental human right to protest. Ultimately, it failed. Scientology got a letter from the council that said, we're not going to vote in your favor. And the day before the vote, Scientology pulled the plug and said, well, we don't want this anymore. The council then went ahead and voted anyway and said, even though Scientology have withdrawn their application, there is no reason to ban protesting. And actually, Scientology's actions resulted in, for example, a data breach. Scientology sent what's called a dead agent pack to councillors, a big, thick document with the photographs and personal information of a bunch of protesters, and said, these are the people protesting. And it included private personal data, like, for example, any criminal records, who people have voted for politically, mental health and healthcare conditions. And firstly, why does Scientology have this information about these protesters anyway? And secondly, why are they processing that data, and why do they think it's okay to share it with the council? I don't know.
Well, it goes along with that. It goes along with that OSA that OSA directive that you talked about, where like you attack the person who's
exactly
taking action against you.
It's all an attack, and the council called them out for it and said that it looks like a data breach, and recommended Scientology refer themselves to the Information Commissioner's Office because they don't have a legal basis to own, process, or share this data. So anyway, that was all the pretext to this picture that you just shared. In order to host their event, they have to have what's called a premises license. Events of this scale that include certain elements, for example, live music, the performance of a play, all those sorts of things, are licensable activities in the UK. So if you want to do a movie screening to your friends, you don't need a license for it. But if you want to do a movie screen and 500 or more people are going to show up, then you need to apply for a permit, basically, in order to do that.
Yeah, and for our viewers, this is not like in a big city like London or Manchester or Birmingham. This is in East Grinstead, Sussex, out in the country. It's basically rolling hills and country estates, right?
Yes, yeah. And Mid Sussex District Council is a kind of middle level of local government here. It's kind of similar to, a county board of supervisors or something, right? So you have the local level, which is the town council. Then you have the district council, which is for a larger geographic area. Then you have the county council, which will be like a state in the US. And then you have the national government. So we're talking the district level here, which is like, a county or something, a couple of counties. So they have to have this premises license. They hold this event in a large tent that they build every year without planning permission. Again, even though it's a temporary structure, because it's, several thousand square meters, they need to apply for permission to build this thing, and they never do. So essentially, I gathered a load of evidence, and I said that in order to host their event with their premises license, they need to be meeting what's called the licensable objectives. So in order to have a premises license, you need to, for example, protect children from harm. You need to ensure public safety. There are certain objectives that you have to meet as a premises license holder. And so I applied and basically said, I think you need to review this premises license because these things are not happening, and included things like videos of children walking in the road. It's a dark country, narrow lane with no lighting. And I said, that's not safe. That is not protecting children from harm.
And the speed limit is pretty high too, right? It's not like
60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And last year, because of people walking in the road, which only happened because Scientology put planters and obstructions and fences and such on the sidewalk next to the road to block protesters from standing there. Because of the obstructions Scientology put there, people had to walk in the road, which made it unsafe. And so I basically said to the council, look, they are not meeting their requirements as per the licensing objectives, and therefore I want you to review their premises license. I didn't say they should revoke it entirely, but I said perhaps you could implement additional conditions that would make it safer for everybody. It was a very long hearing. It's a very legal process that took a lot of time, again, energy and money, but totally worth it, because although the application wasn't approved, so it didn't result in any action, I did manage to get Scientology's lawyers to admit to the fact that the IES event is not a religious ceremony, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it's a game changer, because one of the arguments Scientology make when it comes to protesters is that we are anti-religious, we're disturbing a practice of religion, a worship ceremony. So I put the lawyers on the stand and was like, okay, so what part of the IES event constitutes religious worship? And he went, I'm like, okay, so which part is religious worship? Like, tell me, I want to understand what part of this is. And ultimately the lawyers said, well, the IS event is not religious. Okay, great, thank you, moving on. And that is going to be key, because that protects us as protesters, because now they've admitted it is a fundraising, money-making event, not
donations.
A religion. Yeah
they're there to get their big donors to donate more, and to basically stroke them, acknowledge them and stroke them to give more.
Yeah, precisely. And that's what the IES event really is. It's a money-making exercise.
That's right. That's right. Now, what about what happened? I remember there were parking in this other field, and they paved, or they were going to pave a parking lot or something. What happened with that?
Yeah.
Because I know you pointed that out as well, that was a violation, right?
Yeah, that's still ongoing. They obviously don't have permission for this massive tent, the marquee, and they were given a planning contravention notice, and the council said, hey, you can't build this massive structure in a protected area of outstanding natural beauty without permission. And if you build it next year, you're going to be in trouble. They went ahead and built it next year, and the council said, you need to apply for planning permission. Then, instead of applying for planning permission the following year, which was last year, Scientology applied for what's called a lawful development certificate. And they said, because there's a law in the UK, if you build a structure and you manage to keep it up for 10 years and nobody notices, then it's grandfathered in. You have a right to say, cool, this has been here for 10 years. I don't need to request permission. It's just nobody's noticed it, and therefore you can keep it. So they try to use this excuse that we've been building this tent every year for the last 10 years, and so therefore it should be grandfathered in. But that fell short, because the council were like, well, no, it hasn't been there for 10 years. You put it up and take it down every year. And also, you haven't done it consistently every year for the last 10 years, because you had a massive break over the pandemic years. So you've only done it 3 consecutive years. So even if we were to say you can take it up and bring it down, and that still counts, you don't have 10 years of history. So therefore, no, your LDC has been rejected, forcing Scientology to then apply for planning permission. Now, I think they were trying to avoid this because they know that they're not going to get it. St. Hill is situated in, like I said, an area of outstanding natural beauty, AONB, which is a very protected part of the countryside. And the rule is no development should be approved unless there is significant public benefit, or it is in the public interest to do so.
Like so, a school, for example, or something, like a elementary school or something, right?
Even that would be questionable, but yes, something like that, right? Because the question is, why should the protected, rural landscape be permanently changed unless it's going to genuinely bring real benefit to society, right? So as a rule of thumb, developments are not approved. If they wanted to add a couple of small car parking spaces to their existing car park, that might be approved, because what they could say is, it's going to decrease traffic on and parking on the road, which makes it safer for everyone. And the actual development is so small, it's not really going to harm anyone. Okay, fine. That's okay. But what Scientology have applied for is this 900 space mega car park, permanently paving over half this massive field, and then putting this geocell structure, a plastic grid system, into the ground in another part of the field. And then also permanently changing the landscape of another field so that they can build concrete struts and things to make it easier for them to build this temporary tent every year, and a number of other things as well, all for an event that takes place once a year for 3 days and is only used by Scientologists, and is right next to, and I mean less than 100 meters away from, an ancient protected woodland, like a 1,000-year-old woodland, right? That has its own set of protections. And it's all within a very close proximity to the grade 2 listed St. Hill Manor, which, has its own historical significance as well. So one after the other, all these government agencies came back and said no to this development because it's not going to help society, it's not going to help the community, it's going to do damage to the landscape, damage to the heritage of the local buildings, X, Y, and Z. And it, just as it was looking like they were about to be heard by the council and rejected, Scientology said, wait, hold on. We want an extension. We want to review this application and change a few things. So we're temporarily withdrawing the application so that we can revisit it later in the mid-Sussex.
Because they're afraid of being voted down, and then they have a bigger problem rather than doing the delay tactic like they do in the lawsuits. It's funny too, for our viewers out there, Hubbard got around this in the 1960s at St. Hill because they found a law saying that you're allowed to build a castle on your property, you know, from ancient medieval times. So that's how come they were able to build what now exists as the Advanced Organization St. Hill, because they built it and they said, we're building a castle, and Captain Bill did the design and plans for the original part of it, and then they carried on and did the rest, and that's why they were able to build that. It's funny how they haven't said that tent for the IS is a castle.
Well, because after they did that, that annoyed so many people. They changed the law so that people couldn't get away with that anymore.
Okay.
But I do think it is worth noting that Scientology at this property have a history that spans, 6 decades of not applying for planning permission and ignoring, even when they do apply for planning permission, ignoring the conditions and such of that request. They don't care about the local community or the local environment. They will just do whatever they want as per whatever David Miscavige demands.
Now, let me give you another example. Clearwater, Florida, right, where the Scientology flag land base is and all that. Their government officials there, I remember there was some oak trees, some old oak trees that were in the way of where Scientology wanted to do something for their new superpower building and all that, or for an event. They were going to put a tent out. I think that's what it was. They were going to put a tent out on a lot or whatever, but they're these old oak trees. And the Clearwater City Council said, no, you can't take those down. Well, they took them down anyway, because Miscavige is like, just take them down. What are they going to do? Fine us? We'll just pay the fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of their attitude. Now in Clearwater, as you well know, Mark Bunker, got elected to the city council and that type of thing. They're elected officials, and Scientology tries to control who's going to be on that city commission or who's going to be the mayor, and they try and influence them politically with money and this and that. Is it similar in East Grinstead or in that area where these are elected officials that Scientology may be trying to maneuver with?
Yeah, I think so. Scientology will safe point wherever they are, right? Safe pointing is this practice of buddying up and building relationships with local government officials and so on. And the policy is to bring governments and societies into a state of complete compliance with the aims of the Church of Scientology. And that's a direct quote, L. Ron Hubbard, right? The whole purpose is to bring these people into compliance, not to build relationships to help people or to find alignment with these authorities. No, to bring them into compliance. Okay, that's what Scientology do under safe pointing, and so they will do that wherever they exist, and they have done that with East Grinstead Town Council. We've seen mayors going to events at St. Hill, turning on their Christmas lights, and that's absolutely something that I am challenging all the time. When I first started doing this, I got kicked out of an East Grinstead Town Council meeting. Tony Ortega was banned from East Grinstead for asking too many questions, even though he's a journalist. And over time, we've seen them warm up to the idea that perhaps associating with Scientology may not be the best for their PR image. And now we're in a state where we're making significant headway on that front, which I can't talk about at the moment, but as soon I do have a story that will be coming out very, very soon that proves East Grinstead have finally heard us, which is great, and I'll share that when I can. But what we're talking about here is planning permission, and the marquee is at a different level. That's Mid Sussex District Council, so that's the next level up of government, and Scientology's tentacles aren't quite as far-reaching at that level. There are 1 or 2 people at that council who do go to Scientology events and who have made it extremely difficult for us as protesters to have our voices heard. But for the most part, they don't have a control over the council at that level, which is helpful. But I think the key difference is in the UK, with planning offences, right? You talked about the tree that they took down in Clearwater. Oh, it's okay. We'll agree to not cut down the tree, but we'll cut it down and we'll just pay the fine. In the UK, it's not quite like that, because planning offences are criminal offences. It's not something that you can just pay a fine to get over. People will go to prison, right? So it's a different kettle of fish. And so the pressure, I think, is very much on Scientology at St. Hill right now, because if they don't apply for planning permission and yet again build this giant tent this year and do so without the required permits, they have no excuse to do that. And if they are non-compliant, it's a criminal offense, and people will go to jail.
Wow, that's great. I mean, this again is another reason why you're Scientology's biggest pain in the neck, you know, because you're actually being effective, because you're using the laws to basically point out things and get the government officials to, you know, make the roads safer during the events and that type of thing. You're using the actual for your benefit. Whereas in the United States, they'll just pay these politicians and they just sort of ignore it, or they'll pay the fine for taking down the tree.
Yeah, and again, I think, you know, it was really clear when you look at the premises license review we talked about earlier. Scientology really lobbied the council to brand my application as vexatious, and they were trying to say that I'm only doing this because I'm a bitter apostate and I'm angry with the church and I'm an anti-religious bigot. And I made it a really clear statement as part of my application, and I do genuinely fundamentally believe this. My issue isn't with people who choose to practice Scientology. My issue is with the organization's abusive practices and with their failure to comply with the same laws as the rest of us, right? All I was trying to do with the planning, with the premises license, was to make the whole thing safer for everybody. I'm not against them holding their IAS event. They have a right to hold an event on their property, just like if I wanted to throw a party at my house, I could do that. But if you're going to do something on that scale, you need to do it the right way. There are rules, policies, procedures, and laws in place that should
because you don't have the right. You don't have the right to impinge on everybody else that lives around you, or the public. Yeah,
precisely. And if they just followed the rules, then I would have a lot less to speak about and moan about, right? So I made it really clear, and the council refused to brand my application vexatious, because I think they recognize that, you know, I'm just trying to say, hey, how come we have to follow the rules and they don't, right?
Correct, yeah.
So that's my main point with government officials at the moment, is I'm not asking them to look at the religious practices or whether or not it's harmful or not. I'm saying, hey, just look at what they're doing. Is this okay, right? If I wanted to build an extension on my house or put a greenhouse up or something, I'd have to get permission for that. And if I didn't, the council would fine me and sue me, and I'd be in big legal trouble.
Or they'd make you tear it down.
Organization manages to put up a giant 4,000 square foot meter structure and have 3,000 or 4,000 people come to this event every year, and they've not so much as got told off for it. Like, it's not fair. That's the point I'm trying to make.
No, I agree with you. All right, I'm going to turn to another subject, which you recently were doing some videos on and also did some releasing of information, and that's the recent L. Ron Hubbard birthday event on March 13th in Clearwater with David Miscavige, of course, Master of Ceremonies. There he is right there during the event and that type of thing. Well, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about, and then there's also something else that you did a video on. One is that you mentioned this, that they're packaging up some of the L. Ron Hubbard basics for children. Is that right?
Yeah, the new golden age for the next generation.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because those cartoonish drawings, it reminds me of when they released the Key to Life course in 1990, right when I was leaving Scientology. They hired some former Disney animators to actually do the drawings for the Key to Life course, because it was meant to be sort of simple concepts, and using the cartoonish images was going to relay that message. But this looks like they use somebody similar in doing these things.
Yeah, but I think, you know, this whole thing is, I always try and find the humor where I can and where it's appropriate. I think ultimately, you know, Scientology releasing these new courses is ultimately a scary and shocking thing, because let's not forget the High Court judge here in the UK in 1984 that ruled Scientology is out to capture people, especially children and impressionable young people, to indoctrinate them, brainwash them, and turn them into the captives and tools of the cult, withdrawn from I can't remember the exact wording of it, withdrawn from ordinary thought, right? And relationship with others. That's what Scientology does, and that's what Scientology are doing here with this new, set of courses for kids. They're trying to indoctrinate the kids so that they become the unquestioning, loyal Sea Org followers that they lack at the moment because Scientology is shrinking. That's worrying and it is shocking. But I do try and find the ways that, the other things, what does this mean, for example, for Scientology? And what this actually tells us is two things. One, it tells us Scientology is shrinking, because if there were people walking through the doors and joining Scientology every single day, they wouldn't need to worry about the next generation, because the next generation would be the thousands of people walking through the doors and saying, hey, can I join Scientology every single day? So the fact that they're putting so much emphasis on the kids of Scientologists means they don't have people walking through the doors. And also, the people who have walked through the doors or who have raised in Scientology have got kids, and those kids are not doing Scientology, because you wouldn't need to promote it to them if they were already doing it, right?
That's what those courses are for. It's not for like people who are out on the street who've never been in Scientology. It's for the children of Scientologists.
Yeah, but perhaps even funniest of all, is it shows how out of touch Scientology is with reality, right? I don't know about you, Mark, but it's been a long time since I saw a kid between the ages of 7 and 10 reading a book, right? Nowadays, kids are on their iPads and their phones, right? Exactly. When you go to a restaurant, you see parents with kids, and the kid's got a game or something on their iPad, and it's an educational game. Fair enough, cool, but it's all touchscreen stuff. If Scientology really wanted to get younger kids, they would develop an app, right, that teaches you about Scientology. Why they're releasing books, I don't like. No kid's going to read a book these days.
I'll give you a good example of this. This has gone on for years, even when I was still in the Sea Organization working for David Miscavige. I mean, compact discs had come out in like the early 1980s, you know what I mean? And people were moving away from lectures on tapes and music on cassette tapes and all that. Yet Miscavige was investing millions of dollars into a high-speed cassette production line, right? And then took years selling it out to the point where TDK, the tape manufacturing company that did metal tape, they stopped manufacturing tape anymore, and so Scientology bought the last remaining that they had, and then they put it out on CD years later, and it's the same thing with their films. People going digital, they spent millions of dollars on a film laboratory at the Gold Base after I left, millions of dollars, and then they stopped shooting on film because they have digital cameras. So this is typical of them. They're always behind the way technology and the public are going.
And they are still selling CD Walkmans, right? This is what I find really funny, is, the annual holiday catalog that Scientology put out. Even the most recent one, the Christmas that's just gone by, has a $300 CD Walkman in it that you can buy with headphones with the clear sound technology to listen to L. Ron Hubbard lectures. Like, They are so out of touch. It's painfully funny. But look, I think the reason they haven't done it, they haven't made that digital move, is because it means they're going to lose so much money, right? Yes, you could have a subscription-based model where you pay $100 a month or whatever to have access to the L. Ron Hubbard library, but there's no way that people who already own the books, the Golden Age of Knowledge books and so on, are going to pay full book retail price for an ebook version or an app or something. It would be like a $10 or $20 a month subscription you would expect. So I think it's all about the money for Miscavige, but it does show just how painfully out of touch they are.
I agree with you on the money aspect of it, because there's another aspect of it that you don't mention, which is the royalties that would go to L. Ron Hubbard on a book, as opposed to some service that's on the internet. That's one of the reasons why they kept selling the tapes and then did all that, because the money would be paid to Hubbard for his royalties even after he died. So they're always looking at the money portion of it. Let's keep selling these things until they die out, and then we can go to the new format, and then we'll sell it to them all over again. They had all the lectures on tape. Guess what? Now they got to buy them all on CD.
And my insiders at orgs here in the UK have described how this new golden age of kids is very reminiscent of the golden age of knowledge, right? People are being hard regged for these new books. And for example, not having children is not an acceptable excuse to not buy these new kids courses. You don't have kids? Okay, well, buy a set and donate it to your local library or give it to your local mayor or something. There is no excuse for not parting your $2,000 of your hard-earned cash with them.
You just reminded me of it. You just reminded me of a joke in an old Rodney Dangerfield movie called Caddyshack, where he's this high roller, spending money at the thing, and he gives the money to the guy. Here's some money for your kids. Oh, you don't got no kids? Here's some more. Buy some kids. It's the same thing. It's like, it's a joke, but it's like, oh yeah, just buy the books because you'll eventually want to have kids.
Yeah. Well, I think it's I think it's going to be really interesting to see what's on these courses. You can buy, they have the books and they have the courses that attach to them, and they cover the fundamentals of Scientology, like the ARC triangle. We obviously know what that is, but I think it's really integral to try and understand what they're actually teaching kids about things like how to do assists, how control works and stuff like that. So I currently have a fundraiser up at the moment to try and raise some money to buy at least a couple of these new books so that I can report on them and explain how Scientology have changed the technology, how Miscavige has changed what Hubbard actually said, and how they're repackaging this for children in a way they haven't before, because Hubbard died 40 years ago. So how on earth they've come up with new material, I don't know. So it'd be very interesting to see what's on these books, and we'll see if we can get our hands on a hold of a couple of copies.
If you're doing this fundraiser at your YouTube channel?
Yeah, on my Buy Me a Coffee page, which is buymeacoffee.com/Apostate Alex. If you go to wish list, there's an item in there where you can donate. And I want to get, the key ones that I think will be interesting for people, like, for example, how control works, the confront drills, communication drills, ARC triangle, and assists, right? I don't see a world in which it is acceptable for a 7-year-old child to be locked in a room doing a touch assist with an adult, right? An adult and a child should not be physically touching in any way, shape, or form, especially not in a locked room with nobody else there. So I think it's really important that we find out what's in that book and report on it so that people can make their own assessments about it.
Yeah. So I just put up your address for this is your YouTube channel at Apostate Alex. He's got a great YouTube channel. He does lots of interviews and lots of shows all the time. So if you haven't already checked out his channel, go to that address on YouTube and you can check out his channel, and then also, access his Buy Me a Coffee and donations for this effort that you're taking on right now. The other thing I wanted to mention about the L. Ron Hubbard birthday event, okay, they announced the Ideal organization was opened up in Puerto Rico, of all places, an island out in the Caribbean that's it's a U.S. territory, right? And this is the staff of, the executives of the Ideal organization in Puerto Rico. And in fact, it's probably all the people that are in the Ideal organization. I don't know that there's too many more people in Puerto Rico that are involved in Scientology, but boy, they sure do look great in their jaunty uniforms there, right? And then the other aspect of it that they announced, the big announcement that Miscavige made was that, we've been training all of these executives for years at Flag Land Base in the Flag Executive Briefing course and the Organization Executive course, and we've gotten them up the bridge and all that. And so we're sending out these 10, 11, 12-man command teams to these organizations. He mentioned Kansas City and Seattle and Portland and some places in Europe or whatever, and they're sending these teams out, right? And I just found it really funny because Scientology's been doing this for years, okay? Even when I was in back in the early 1980s, they had a flag executive briefing course, bring in trainees from all over the world. This is going to expand the organizations and everything, right? So they've been doing this off and on for years and years and years. But I just find it really funny now, having been out of Scientology for so long. Could you imagine some private company having an event for like their customers, which really the people that are there are the donors and the customers, and telling them, oh, by the way, our different locations, they really suck. So we've been training these other people that we're hired for years, and we're sending them to your local Kansas City store, and they're really going to turn around things for you in your neighborhood, right? I mean, it just is preposterous. And the whole reason is because they know, I mean, Scientologists know that Scientology is not expanding. It is not growing. Okay. They've been doing this, like I said, for the last 40 years, and it's actually smaller now than it was in 1980. There's less people in Scientology than there were in 1980, but they have more money because they get these rich people to just shovel over cash, and they turned it into a donations organization. So I just found that really funny that they're announcing these different teams going out. And I'm thinking to myself, how is that supposed to impress somebody,
Well, this is not the first time that they had an evolution where executives went to flag to do the FEBC and came back to expand their orgs. It's always pitched as this is the new thing that's finally going to get Scientology booming and expanding, because Scientology always has to present itself as expanding. And that's one of the problems I have with it. Is like, guys, just be honest, right? The best thing Scientology could do right now is to come out, David Miscavige, on stage and say, guys, we are not as big as we were 50 years ago, right? We all know it. We all have seen the orgs being empty, right? It's a problem. But what are we going to do about it, right? 1. 2, lots of people have left Scientology and explain how they've been abused and harmed and, this, that, and the other. Scientology don't even need to, at this point, agree to take any action, but just admit that things have gone wrong in the past and apologize for them and agree to investigate, right? Before they even agree to do anything, just investigate. Say, hey, look, we acknowledge these things have happened. We are deeply sorry, and we will do whatever we can to make it right. Those two things alone would fundamentally reverse Scientology's negative PR image, right? And it would do it would have a huge change on the organization's reputation. The problem is Scientology will never do that because they have to apply the policies that were written by L. Ron Hubbard. And they say to attack the attacker. There is no policy that says, come out and be honest and change things and get rid of the abuse, right? And when it's an ex-member that's saying you need to stop the abuse, there isn't a mechanism through which Scientology can say, oh, maybe you're right. Maybe we should stop doing this because the policy says you're an enemy and we need to attack you. So they're doomed to failure, in my opinion.
Well, you know what they used to do when Hubbard was alive? Hubbard would issue an amnesty during certain times where basically people who had gotten disenchanted with Scientology or had gotten in trouble or put in a rehabilitation project or whatever, he would just issue a blanket amnesty and basically, which was a way of admitting that, oh yeah, you weren't really a rock slammer and you really didn't need to be in the RPF. So we're going to let you come out, but we're not going to admit any guilt, but that's really their acknowledgement of that. But they don't do that anymore. If they would cancel disconnection and actually literally allow people to be in communication with their families, like really do it, not just do it, say they did it and then not really do it, that would make some changes too. But like you said, they're not going to do that. To them, that's against L. Ron Hubbard's policy.
But again, even an amnesty, like you said, is not an admission of guilt. Scientology needs to be honest with itself, right? That it has caused harm and it needs to apologize for that, right? Yeah. And that's just an amnesty doesn't achieve that goal. And they won't ever do that. And that's why it's so important that we stand up and share survivor stories and say, hey, look, it's not about whether you think auditing helps people or whether you think that, you know, the ARC triangle improves communication. It's not about that. What it's about is the systemic abuse and harm that happens in this organization and the impact it has on second and third generation people, children who are raised in Scientology, who never had a choice. They didn't join, they were raised in it, and they were told this is the way of doing things. You have to join the Sea Org. And then 20, 30 years later, when they've been locked in a room or when they've been beaten up by Dave Miscavige and they say, I'm out, I've had enough. And they go, well, you can't speak to your family ever again. Like, that is a systemic issue that needs addressing.
Absolutely. And to show that they have not changed their policy at all, we give you Amir Essalhi, who was a staff member at a Happy organization in Scotland, who was a staff member there and started speaking to you. You were the first person that he spoke with, right? Him communicating with somebody who was, quote unquote, not involved with Scientology anymore. And why don't you tell, he came on our channel as well. We spoke to him and he's a great young man and all. Why don't you tell people, you know, what happened to him and what's he's up to right now?
Yeah, Amir is a very good friend of mine now. He and I were speaking for months before he came on my channel. He was under the radar and was asking questions about my experience in Scientology and other people's experiences. And, you know, we were talking for some time and I said, look, dude, the moment you tell Scientology you've been speaking to me, they're going to tell you to disconnect. And he was like, well, I don't think that that's right. I've got freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and I don't believe in forced disconnection. I said, good for you. But unfortunately, that's how Scientology operates right now. They tell you the policy is handle or disconnect, but actually the policy is disconnect. And if you don't, you're in trouble. And we spent some time talking about this. And, you know, he was like, well, I don't think that's what Scientology should be. And I said, no, I agree. Right. They're applying Scientology in a way that is not how it was kind of meant to be for an introductory Scientologist. Every single person I've spoken to, like yourself and Janis and, you know, Danielle Chamberlain, people who are around with Hubbard back in the day, is the motivation behind helping people is, especially at the introductory lower levels of Scientology. When I was in Scientology, I very much just wanted to help the planet. And I thought that Scientology was the way of doing that. All of that disappears the further up the bridge you go, the further into the organization you go. And when you become a staff member, it's an example of that. It's like, if you don't comply, then you are in trouble. And so Amir came on my channel and we did an interview as a current Scientology staff member. He then subsequently was given an R factor by his ED, his executive director, and very quickly put in his place. He was ordered to do hard manual labor and ordered to disconnect from me. And he walked out the door and is now living a life free of the shackles of Scientology. And I'm extremely proud of him. He is at the very beginning of a long road of recovery and healing. A lot of people have been asking him to start a YouTube channel and all of that, and you know, I think he wants to at some point, but I'm really telling him to look, slow down. There's no rush. Leaving Scientology does not mean you have to become an activist. If you want to, go for it. Absolutely. If you want to start a YouTube channel, if you want to come protest with me, I'll support you in any way that I can. But I would just advise you to slow down a bit, figure out what just happened to you, right? And do that healing and get the support you need before rushing into any decisions.
That's great advice. I mean, when we talked to him, he still was working on staff, but we decided along with him to hold our interview until after to see what happened. And he got, you know, declared or kicked out or whatever before we put our video out. But we also, when we did our interview with him, we weren't interviewing him from the point of view of saying like, oh, this is bad and that's bad and this is bad. We were more interested in, well, what's it like in Scientology as a staff member right now? And then what do you actually believe? You know, what are they telling you about David Miscavige? You know what I mean? So it was more, we were inquisitive about what was actually going on. And of course, he was very inquisitive too, because he was watching our channel and watching our shows and yours and everybody else's. And it's funny. I mean, he basically violated what Scientology doesn't want their members to do, which is went on the internet to actually see what was out there, you know.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do a video with him in the first place, because I said to him, I was like, look, Amir, right, one of my main problems with Scientology is Scientology says that communication is a universal solvent, right? And we might not agree with the fact that Scientology helps humanity, right? But that's okay, right? It's okay for people to disagree. And I don't see why there's a problem with somebody like you who's on staff at the Church of Scientology speaking to someone like me who's an ex-Scientologist. Like, what is wrong with that, right? And he agreed with that point. So before we did our first video, we did agree to some ground rules. We said, right, we're not going to talk about the confidential OT materials. We're not going to talk about specific names of suppressive people. We were going to talk about people's stories and allegations of abuse, like, for example, people being beaten up by Miscavige and so on. But we agreed, for the sake of not forwarding enemy lines, we weren't going to say their names. Like, there's certain things we agreed to, and I was like, yeah, no problem. We agreed we weren't going to attack the church. I said, yeah, I don't want to attack the church. I want to prove, even if it's just to you, I want to prove that it is possible for a current Scientologist and an ex-Scientologist to have a conversation that is about difficult stuff to do with Scientology, and the world isn't going to collapse into flames, right?
It's funny that was our viewpoint on it too. That's how we did our show. And then, just funny you mentioned this. That's why I titled the cover. This is the thumbnail of our video. He gets in trouble for being there and communicating, which Hubbard has said is one of the major things, or major crimes, or whatever, against society, is being there and communicating. You know, society says that's wrong to be there and communicate, which is, you know, they're saying Hubbard's saying that you should do that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Amir is doing well. I'm still trying to. We talk every single day, and I'm still trying to support him in any way that I can. But yeah, also just making sure that he's getting the support he needs to heal and try and understand everything that he's just been through.
One last thing, that you just did a video just yesterday, I think, about the L. Ron Hubbard birthday event to Scientology erasing Tom Cruise and John Travolta from the photographs. What is your theory as to why they did that?
I mean, look, we could do a whole video on this particular topic, but I think it's a PR thing. You know, Scientology photoshopped Tom Cruise and John Travolta out of photos of the audience at the most recent LRH birthday event. It is clear as day a bad Photoshop job. I can only guess it's because Scientology knew that pictures of the two of them at a Scientology event would result in international, you know, media attention. The tabloids love a good Tom Cruise story. So I can only assume that in order to avoid a media frenzy, they said, let's just take them out of the photos, not realizing somebody like me would do something as simple as to zoom in and increase the brightness to clearly see the brush marks and the evidence of photoshopping. The best one, though, Mark, is the hovering arm that's not linked to a body. Like, it's so clearly badly photoshopped.
Well, and here's the other thing too. They have no problem with using those photos of Tom Cruise and John Travolta in the front row in their Impact magazine and into the promotions they do to inside Scientologists, particularly the donors, to show, look, they're with us, you know. But then, of course, to the general public, they don't want that bad public relations, so we're taking them out of the photos.
Yeah, the internal message is very much, look at all of the celebrities we've got coming to these events. But the external message is, please don't attack us. We don't want the press and the media. It's bad for Scientology's image, having these articles talking about the human trafficking, the lawsuits that David Miscavige is facing at the moment, the Whitney Mills wrongful deaths lawsuit. Understandably, it's looking bad for Scientology, and so they want to avoid that scrutiny. Similarly, it's bad for John Travolta and Tom Cruise's PR image to be associated with Scientology, because everybody knows it's a dangerous, harmful organization. So I can see why they've done it. You just would have hoped that they would have done a better job at it, that it wasn't so noticeable.
Exactly. Now, the final thing I wanted to ask you about is, because obviously, you know, you've been the pain in the neck of Scientology here now for over the last several years, like effectively being their pain in the neck. And obviously, you know, they fair game you and they come after you and that type of thing. How are you holding up? And is it getting bad, worse? Is it always the same? I mean, you know, what's going on in that regard?
Fair game is real. It is non-stop. It is certainly not pleasant. but it is something that you kind of have to learn to live with. And one of the things that I want to tell people is that if you have left Scientology or you're under the radar and you want to share your story, it is really, really important that you do. The risk of being fair gamed is so low, right? Most people that come on my channel and share their stories once or twice have never been fair gamed, right? In my experience, because they have got to a point where they're so under-resourced, understaffed, they're so small now, they have really limited resources in terms of the time they can spend attacking certain people. So yes, they've still got lots of money, but the people directing the attacks, right, they're fighting fires, and it's just whoever Miscavige says this person's the target this week. So they assign the resources according to who they see as the biggest threat in any given week. And just somebody sharing their story once or twice is not going to be seen as a huge threat. I had organized the largest protest in the UK against Scientology abuse in 15 years. And it wasn't until months afterwards that they started fair gaming me. So yeah, now I'm making all these strides and working with government officials and so on. They're fair gaming me pretty hard. But if you just want to come on and share your story, the likelihood of you being fair gamed is quite low. It's not pleasant, and you do have to be prepared for it. But I don't think they're going to come after you. I think everybody should find their voice once again after leaving Scientology. And the more people that share their stories, the more likely it is we'll be able to stop similar amounts of harm from happening to other people.
That's right. And there's Apostate Alex. That's your YouTube channel. If somebody wants to reach out to you, they can reach out to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can, from personal experience, when we first left Scientology 36 years ago, we were a target because they were worried about us going to the IRS and testifying because they hadn't gotten their IRS exemption. And then they still spied on us all the way up until 2009, 2010. That's how I got my nickname from OSA. But the fact of the matter is once we started our channel, it's been 3 years now, we've done over 370 videos and interviews, and we basically tell it like it is. We have not been fair game regarding that, except there's the usual websites up about the enemies of Scientology and all that stuff. But if you don't look at them, it doesn't really matter. And none of my family or friends, they could care less. They don't look at it, But so if anybody wants to come on and tell their story, I mean, we've had so many people on our channel as well as yours. Same thing. They don't get fair gamed. I mean, literally, you can tell your story, and a lot of people find it very therapeutic to do so. To speak about these things, they remember things that they hadn't thought about in years, and it's very helpful, to do that. So you can reach out to Alex, or you can reach out to us here at Scientology Peeling the Onion for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to thank you, Alex, for being here. I'm going to do a couple of different business things real quick here. The first thing I wanted to mention is if you're really, really a pain in the neck for Scientology, you've got to have a Rock Slammer t-shirt. Okay, we've got this design t-shirt in our merchandise store with a fist and a Rock Slammer. If you're a Rock Slammer and you want to be rock slamming every day, you can order one of those t-shirts there. Just go down below. It's on there as one of the products you can buy, or you can go to the merchandise link in the video description below. Or if you want to just, if you're not that, radical about going after it, then you can get one of our connection t-shirts, which is what we preach here on our channel. Is not disconnection. We promote connection, which you have there, the word connection, a heart with 2 arrows going into it, because we want people to reconnect with their family members and friends who were in Scientology or who are no longer in Scientology. So again, you can order your t-shirts, numerous different colors, at our merchandise store down in the video description there. And then finally, I'd have to mention, we've got Janis's Complete Liquid Multivitamins. She's a sponsor, OUTBACK Natural, for our show. You get all your vitamins in like 2 tablespoons or a little shot glass. It's peach flavored. You drink it down and you've taken your vitamins for the day. As she likes to say, ditch the pills and drink the power. So again, you can order the Complete Liquid Multivitamins in the United States down below. The t-shirts, you can order those and they'll be shipped all over the world, but the multivitamins has to be here in the US of A. So I just wanted to mention those things and thank everybody for that. Finally, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and hit that notification button so that you know when the next time a video comes out. It helps get the word out. If you want to subscribe to Alex's channel, just go to @Apostate Alex there. That's his YouTube channel, and I'm sure he would appreciate the viewers and the subscription there as well.
Thank you so much,
Joe. Have you got anything else you'd like to say, Alex, before we end off?
Only just 2 event announcements. On the 6th of June 2026, I will be hosting a talk in East Grinstead. A number of ex-Scientologists are gathering. We will be providing a platform for survivors to share their stories, to talk about what life is like behind closed doors at St. Hill here in the UK. If you'd like to come along to that, tickets are just, I think, £12.50 to cover the cost of the room hire. And similarly, in September, for those of you over in the US, we're organizing HowdyCon 2026, which will be in New London, Connecticut. And again, another chance to hear survivor stories and raise money for the Michael J. Rinder Aftermath Foundation. So if you don't have any idea what it is I'm talking about, head to my channel. I've talked about both of them there, or head to the website howdycon2026.com or my blog scientologybusiness.com.
There you go. Anyway, everybody, we thank you for watching, and until next time, bye-bye. We'll see you later.